When we think about the Lenten season leading up to Easter, the first thing that usually comes to mind is giving up. Jesus gave up his holy place in heaven to come down and live among us in our not-so-holy world. And every year during this time, we're called to give up something we cherish as a symbolic remembrance of what he gave up for us. That's a good and worthy practice. But perhaps we should reframe our thinking about the Lenten season. Maybe we should think of Lent as more of an extension of Christmas, a bookend, really. And instead of being a season of giving up, we should think of it as a season of gifts. In fact, I'm going to suggest that the gifts of Easter we're going to discuss are the most precious gifts any person could ever receive, because they cost God so much to give. There was a time many years ago when everything was handmade. The table that held our midday meal, the baskets that carried our goods, the hammers, the nails, the saws that built our houses, and the clothes that protected us from the elements. All were made by hand. Men and women worked for years at their craft, perfecting their techniques and skills and artistry until they were called master craftsmen or artisans. Today, most of the things we take for granted are mass-produced by machines, churning out thousands of identical pairs of jeans, coffee mugs, and automobiles. But in small pockets of artistic resistance all over the world, the traditions of craftsmen and artisans still flourish in the shops of weavers and blacksmiths and carpenters, metalworkers, and potters. Today, their work is mostly sold as gifts in small boutique stores. But what beautiful and significant gifts they are, made out of love and passion for the art of crafting by hand, made at a cost to the artist, of time and effort, pain and persistence, and loved by the one who receives the gift as something unique and valuable, precious. Because when you get one of these handmade objects as a gift, you not only receive the physical piece of work, but also you get a piece of the heart and soul of the artist who gave so much of themselves to create it. One of the oldest and most practical craftsman's skills is the art of basket weaving. In ancient days, in terms of usefulness to society, basket weaving was on the same essentials level as fire building and wheel making. Baskets were used as containers in every home. But they were also the original FedEx package for items carried by early traders from city to city. Plant materials ideal for the task included narrow leaves and fronds and vines. Most important, they needed to be pliable and strong. But there was often a catch. Some of the best materials, such as blackberry vines, had thorns, and the basket weavers often paid the price of scratched and cut hands as they worked to remove the thorns so they could weave the vines into something useful and beautiful. This brings us to our first gift that God gave us at the cross. Over 2,000 years ago, in a grimy stone cell in Jerusalem, a Roman soldier took some branches and wove what he assumed would be a gift of shame and mockery, a crown of thorns. Little did he know he was actually creating one of the greatest gifts of all, custom made just for us. Have you ever wondered why God gives so much? We could exist on less. He could have left the world flat and gray. We wouldn't have known the difference. But instead, he splashed orange in the sunrise and blue in the sky. He made the birds sing. He gave the flowers their fragrance. He gave food its taste. God's gifts shed light on his good and generous heart. But his greatest gift of all, his greatest act of love for us, was in sending Jesus into our world. Just think for a moment how amazing this gift was and what God had to give up to make it happen. In that instant, when Jesus was born, God swapped eternity for calendars. We may search out the moment the first wave slapped on a shore, or the first star burst in the sky, but we'll never find the first moment when God was God. The Bible tells us that God is beyond our understanding. The number of his years is past finding out. There was no moment when God was not God, for he is eternal. But when Jesus came, this all changed. For the first time, he heard a phrase never used in heaven. Your time is up. As a child, he had to leave the temple because his time was up. As a man, he had to leave Nazareth because his time was up. As the Savior, he had to die because his time was up. For 33 years, the stallion of heaven lived in the corral of time. And what about the fact that Jesus lived in a body? One moment he was a boundless spirit, equally present in Peking and Peoria, as active in Texas as Timbuktu. The next moment, he was flesh and bones, imprisoned in a human body, restricted by weary, prone muscles and eyelids. His once limitless reach was limited to the stretch of an arm. His speed checked to the pace of human feet. I wonder if he was ever tempted to reclaim his boundlessness. In the middle of a long trip, did he ever consider transporting himself to the next village? When rain chilled his bones, was he tempted to change the weather? When the heat parched his lips, did he give thought to popping over to the Caribbean for some refreshment? If he ever entertained such thoughts, he never gave in to them. Not once did Christ use his supernatural powers for personal comfort. Remarkable. But was Jesus' humanity the most remarkable part of God's gift in sending him into this world? Many would argue not. Many would point beyond the surrender of timelessness and boundlessness to the surrender of sinlessness. In the Bible, an object that symbolizes the consequences of sin in humanity's heart is a thorn bush. Back in Eden, when the shadow fell across the garden, the Lord said, I will put a curse on the ground, and the ground will produce thorns and weeds for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. God echoed the truth of these words when he urged the Israelites to purge the land of the godless Canaanites. He told Moses, if you don't force those people out of the land, they will bring you trouble. They will be like sharp hooks in your eyes and thorns in your sides. The Canaanites proved to be just that. The Bible tells us rebellion results in thorns. Proverbs 22:5 states, evil people's lives are like paths covered with thorns and traps. Jesus even compared the lives of evil people to a thorn bush. In speaking of false prophets, he said, you will know these people by what they do. Grapes don't come from thorn bushes, and figs don't come from thorny weeds. The fruit of sin is thorns, spiny, prickly, cutting thorns. So it's interesting, given this symbolism in the Bible, that when Jesus was crucified, the soldiers placed a crown of thorns on his brow. Mark's gospel tells us that when the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, they put a purple robe on him and then twisted together a crown of thorns, and they set it on him. And they began to call out to him, Hail, King of the Jews! These unnamed Roman soldiers took branches, mature enough to bear thorns, nimble enough to bend, and they wove them into a crown of mockery. I emphasize the point of the thorns to suggest a point you may have never considered. If the fruit of sin is thorns, isn't the thorny crown on Christ's brow a picture of the fruit of our sin that pierced his heart? What is the fruit of sin? Well, step into the briar patch of humanity and feel a few thistles of our beastly nature: shame and fear and disgrace and discouragement, anxiety. Haven't we hidden away in the shadow of these brambles? The heart of Jesus, however, had not. As John tells us, God is light. In him there is no darkness at all. Jesus had never been cut by the thorns of sin. What you and I face daily, he never do. Anxiety, he never worried. Guilt, he was never guilty. Fear, He never left the presence of God. Jesus never knew the fruits of sin until he became sin for us. When, as Paul would say, God made him who had no sin to be sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. There's a classic children's fairy tale you probably know called The Beauty and the Beast that illustrates what Jesus did for us. Once upon a time, as the story goes, a handsome prince lived in a pleasant palace. But then the shadow of a curse fell on the castle of the prince because a shadow had fallen on his heart. And when the darkness fell, the prince hid away from sight. Secluded in his castle, the prince was left with a glistening snout and curly tusks and a bad mood. He looked like a beast and he acted like one. But all that changed when a girl came. She was, well, a beauty, stunningly gorgeous, contagiously kind. If ever two people lived up to their names, it was Beauty and the Beast. I wonder what would have happened to the Beast if the Beauty hadn't appeared. Better yet, what would have happened if she hadn't cared? And who would have blamed her if she hadn't? He was such a beast, hairy and drooling and roaring, defying, but she did care. And because the Beauty loved the Beast became more beautiful himself. Now, all of us can relate to the Beast. There's something bad, something beastly within each of us. It wasn't always so. There was a time when humanity's face was beautiful and the palace pleasant. But that was before the shadow of the curse fell across the garden, before the shadow fell across the heart of Adam. Ever since the curse, we've been different. Beastly, ugly, defiant, angry. We do things we know we shouldn't do and wonder why we did them. Paul tells us that we are by nature children of wrath. It's not that we can't do good, it's just that we can't keep from doing bad. In theological terms, we are totally depraved. Though we have been made in God's image, we're corrupt at the core. In the fairy tale, the curse ends when the Beauty kisses the Beast. But in the Bible, the Beauty does much more. He becomes the Beast, so the Beast can become the Beauty. Jesus changed places with us. The sinless one took on the face of a sinner so that we sinners could take on the face of a saint. And when Jesus did this, all the emotions of sin tumbled in on him like shadows in a forest. He felt anxious, guilty, and alone. Matthew tells us that when Jesus was crucified, he cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Can't you hear the emotion in Jesus' prayer? These are not the words of a saint. This is the cry of a sinner. The crown of thorns, representing the consequences of our sin, reflected more than the depraved heart of the soldier who crafted it. This crown could have been made and should have been worn by every one of us. But it was not, thanks to the greatest gift of all. Why did God do all this? Why did He give us this gift? Well, the answer is simple. For God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son, that whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have eternal life. God did it for us, just for us, because He loves us.